whole story how it happened.
Where is that material now?
It was sold in the first auction.
Is it at Emory?
No.
No.
Some of it would have been.
Somebody bought it. I don't know who, but
Is
it
there a
was
way for
sold.
me to find out?
It was the Christie's auction,
Okay, so it's Chris.
and it was the Golden Goose Press
Yeah,
lot.
yeah, I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Richard was my brother's godfather.
Oh,
So
really?
I heard his name like 8,000 times a day from my dad's entire later life.
And Richard.
Dick, he was always called Dick Emerson.
That's right, Dick.
Yeah.
And you know, your father and Richard were very important people in the
That's
poetry
what
community.
Don Allen said that.
Don Allen, right? Ah!
My father was inordinately proud of getting a plug from Don Allen, and there was something I was going to, Dick Emerson told me that Golden Goose was named this way, and then he goosed me. So there you go.
Speaking of Don Allen, I would like to bring up a friend. Many of you may have read some of his books, but Dennis McNally is a biographer of Jack Kerouac. He worked with the Grateful Dead. He wrote a book about the Dead called Long Strange Trip, and he's going to talk to Gerd about some of the other times in his life and the connections that Gerd had with the Beats as well as the 60s scene. Come on up, Dennis. How about a round of applause?
And eventually I might even get to read some poems.
We'll get to that.
I doubt it.
First, happy birthday. And mine was yesterday, so
Oh, mine was October 12th.
Hey, Columbus Day. You were born on Columbus Day.
That's right.
So you always got it off from school.
Right, right, exactly.
After 1936, when I came from Europe,
Oh, okay.
because I was born in Saarbrücken in the French-German border, and I was born in 28.
Wow.
So let me, if I might, let me ask, I want to ask some sort of roots questions about the very beginnings of things. And I'm open to you correcting this, okay? It's on the web, which means, but in poking around the internet, it says, among other things, that after a very brief visit to CCNY, and you graduated from Bronx Science, and you went to CCNY for a couple
I
of
didn't
weeks.
graduate from Bronx Science.
Oh, didn't graduate either.
No, I graduated from William Howard Taft.
Okay, you got out of high school, you briefly visited college,
Yes.
didn't like that very much, and it said, what I found interesting is it said that you immediately headed to the East Village art scene, which in the late 40s wasn't the East Village. I mean, did they just mean the village? How did you get to the village, and why did you go to the village?
Well,
did you
because
go to the village?
it was a lot less expensive to live on Avenue A or in the East than it was in the village itself.
Even then.
Even then.
But what attracted you to the village?
Uh,
How did you know about
how did I know about
Greenwich Village?
Hey,
What brought you there?
okay. So I went to Bronx Science, but most of my friends from the neighborhood, which was Washington Heights, went to music and art. And I knew a lot of people from music and art, and they were the ones who introduced me to the village, especially my friend, the painter who was in the Bay Area until he died a few years ago, Ivan Bashrakov, and Elsie Peterson, and so I started by renting a room with a roommate in Greenwich Village, and it didn't work out very well because he turned out to be a kind of a sex whatever, I can't really think.
Addict.
Addict may have been right, whether it was. Anyway, and then in the first couple of days I was introduced to my first joint, by a translator at the United Nations who gave a party and who turned out to be gay, which I didn't know anything about at the time. So I was introduced to a lot of different stuff in about 3 or 4 days. And it stuck. I mean, that first joint, and I'm still smoking 70 years later, right? So, you know, and sex is also still a preoccupation.
Never goes away, thank God. I also read that you got a scholarship to Black Mountain College and went for a day and then left.
Not a day, but more or less a week.
Okay, but how did you find out about Black Mountain? And I guess that was not common knowledge.
No, because I became a friend. I worked at a place called the Jabberwocky Shop on Greenwich Village, and it was next to the bookshop called the Four Seasons, which was owned by a woman named Toshka Goldman, and Toshka let me borrow whatever books I liked, and she was the place where all of the partisan review people used to gather, and one of the people I met through her was Isaac Rosenfeld, who was a fairly well-known avant-garde writer at the time, and he had been teaching at Black Mountain, and he said to me, after he and I had talked, I was with this woman, the first woman I ever lived with, and I wrote some lines for her, and she said, "But you're a poet." And she had graduated from UC Berkeley and in English, so I took her seriously. She said, "You're a poet?" I started believing her, you know, so I started doing it because it seemed like a kind of a great thing to do, and my father wanted me to be a food chemist, and I had no interest in that anymore already. So anyway, so that's how I became a poet.
And at least you were moderately interested in Black Mountain College to apply enough to get a scholarship.
I went there, and because Isaac had told me about M.C. Richards, Mary Caroline Richards, who was a fine poet and a potter, and she taught there. I went there to study with her, and within a couple of days, she and her husband, who was the dean of Black Mountain, and a number of other people had a schism, and they all left. Boom. And I didn't have anybody to study with, and the person who took charge was a painter named Hans or Joseph Albers.
Oh, great.
Yes, and Hans came to me and he said, "You're Stern?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You're a poet, aren't you?" And I said, "No, I'm not a poet. I came here to study poetry with MC, and she's gone." And he said, "You don't need a great studio like this with lights and windows. All you need is a pencil or a pen to write poetry." So he took me to a closet. No windows.
Oh.
And I looked at him, and he had an accent just like my father, Otto, because they were both very German. And so did his wife, who was a weaver, Annie Albers, yes. And I went out on the highway and hitched my way back to New York right away. So I didn't stay.
Understood. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, brief series of questions and then ask you to read. But I want to get you out to San Francisco, out here,
Okay.
in your biography. So, what made you come to the Bay Area, Northern California? Because apparently you went to Big Sur first.
No, I didn't go to Big Sur
Yeah.
first.
How did you get to Big Sur?
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Come on out.
You know, I told you about the first lady that I lived with. She came from Boston, and while I was living with her, a friend of hers she had been her roommate at UC Berkeley, named Bard Norville, came to New York to visit, and she met me, and I told her the story about what had happened at Black Mountain. She said, "Oh, you don't need Black Mountain, just come to California, because nowadays in the University of California in Berkeley, if you've been in California for a certain amount of days, you can register and it'll be free." That turned out not to be true, but I believed her, and I hitchhiked, and she said, "You can stay with me and my husband." When I got to San Francisco, they were living in North Beach, and as soon as I got there, he decided he didn't want his wife anymore, and he left, but he and I became friends, and the very first day, they had a Model A Ford with what do you call those seats in the back? Rumble seat. And they said, "We're going down to Big Sur to the ranch, and you're welcome to come with us." So I got in the rumble seat and we drove down, and it was quite a wild experience, because first we stopped. It's the seaport.
Monterey.
It was not Monterey, but
Carmel.
Santa
the name of the place near Monterey where.
Carmel.
Carmel by the sea.
No, not Carmel. Carmel's fancy.
Okay.
It's a place where they have fishing boats.
Tascadero.
Moss Landing.
Anyway, whatever it is, I met a guy who had a dump truck, and my friends went in the Model A, and this guy took me in the dump truck, and he was going up to the ranch. The ranch was at Big Sur, up the mountain, up way up a dirt road, and at the very top of the mountain was a beautiful piece of land, and it belonged to a man named Jaime Dungulo.
Oh, yeah.
And Jaime, when we got up there, here I was, and I was expecting cowboys, because what's a ranch? Here was this guy in ragged shorts and nothing else, and a beard, and I said hello, and he looked at me, he said, "New York, but German, isn't it?" I said, what do you mean? He said, "Didn't you speak German when you were a child? Because I could hear it in your voice." He was a linguist. And it was one of the things that he was.
He was also arrested as a cross-dresser.
And he he lived with the North Coast Indians. He wrote a book called
Indian Tales?
Indian Tales, thank you. I knew him for the rest of his life. I introduced him to KPFA, and I recorded his stories, and that's another whole story, KPFA. But we have all these people. I have a daughter and her husband, Radha. I have a son, Zalman, who's a code writer with Google. There are all these people, and I just met Lisa, who was married to Gregory Corso, who, as far as I'm concerned, never mind all the beats and Jerry Chimino, Gregory was the best of us poets. He really was. And it's tremendous to meet you. That's amazing. And Ramon and his wife, I met Ramon when he was part of San Francisco Tape Music Center, when in the
64 maybe?
64 about, and he introduced me to a man who was a technician at San Francisco Tape Music Center. I was looking for somebody to help me put on my first multimedia show in San Francisco, which I had met the wonderful director of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, George Culler, and he'd offered me a show. I couldn't believe it, and I needed help. And Ramon introduced me to their tech, Michael Callahan.
Good job.
And I'm still working with Michael, all those years later. And we've been extremely close. We formed with another bunch of people a collaborative commune called USCO. But we're getting off the tracks, sorry.
Oh, no. You can't get off the track,
Whoa.
Actually,
That's what you think. I get off the track all the time.
I would love to do history for hours, but how about you read some poetry?
Oh, okay.
Oh, that.
Good poetry. And I'm going to start out by reading just a short piece of a poem which is not by me, but the question that I most often am asked about poetry is, what is your favorite poem? Poem. What is your favorite poem? And I have the answer. My favorite poem is The Idea of Order at Key West by Wallace Stevens. So I'm going to read just a few lines of it. She sang, beyond the genius of the sea, the water never formed in mind or voice, like a body holy body fluttering its empty sleeves. The sea, I'm going to jump, the sea was not a mass, no more was she. The song and water were not medleyed sound, even if what she sang was what she heard, since what she sang was uttered word by word. And at the very end of the poem, oh, blessed rage for order, pale Ramon. Pale Ramon. The maker's rage to order words of the sea, words of the fragrant portals dimly starred, and of ourselves and of our origins, in ghostlier demarcations, keener sounds. And there's a lot more in that poem, and it's really a remarkable poem, even from a remarkable poet. And I was going to read a bunch of poems from my fourth book of poems, which is called Wendland, and it's just that it was out this summer. My first book was out in 1950, more or less. Here is another poem that I that's even after that book, the recent poem and it's called One More Time, Stoned Again. How many times does again have to be, or not to tell what or how many it is was without definition, measurable consequence, appears archivably like then, gonna get gone to last after first, agree to not worry, open about me, are all only one after all. And We Are All One was the name of our eventual multimedia piece. I belong to a group in New York called Brevitas, where we put online poems. There are about 40 or 50 of us nowadays. It's been going for over 10 years, and I've been doing it for 4. And you can put poems online the 1st and 15th of the month, and they have to be less than 14 lines or 14. And mine from November was, when one thing at a time is not enough, what's to be done about another more than that we are all one unity? Very much like the last lines of that other poem. And another one was, from can't to will, far enough to ride, walk, drive, he said of himself. Order prepared, one bullet at a time, or develop another apparent sequence, eventual, initially evidential, transition for effective finality. Get along, little doggy, get along. From this, there, can't to will. Anyway, from when then, I put little slips in to signify which poems I would like to read. Given the choice, would you trade more knowledge for less understanding? Or more understanding for less knowledge? Fact, no hype. In fact, awesome, back-upable, indeed mea culpable. You have a problem closing anything, jars, tubes, even doors, and turning things off, lights, music, people, targets of opportunity, raising experience stakes, making love to expectations, evolving consequence, as in amnesia, karmic loopholes, summing hard discologies, dumping operating systems subroutinely, gently down the stream. This is from my daughter Rhoda's son, who was unfortunately shot dead many, many years ago, and it's called Checking the Set for Christopher. There was nothing to forgive, then murder impossible to forget drove your express spirit beyond this backbeat of no time, like no now, presence gone, remembering your cramped tears, homesick, ready for return, stone buddy, cool dude games, Kofer, Topher, and Rasta Grandpa together inhaled our drug of choice, voicing synced to stop the violence, snorkeling over poetry coral heads. Life's quick if it's not, where is it there you're gone to be scattered ashes on Tamalpine Peak, high-beam grin turned to us from 21 years of photolit token keepsake images portending immediate fatal finality. That shot too unexpected to be so true. I probably shouldn't have read that, except at the end. But, so. Hey, this one's for the beat. Dead or alive? Alan's dead. Carl's dead. Jack's dead. Bill's dead. Neil's dead. Tim's dead. I'm alive. You're alive. You and you and you. Alive, alive, oh. Here in PI, Carl, all in blues, locked in with you, define your terms. He answers to hello, drop books. Janae, Celine, smart, from under each arm, blue shirt, blue pants, blue shoes, suede blue, to stick out handshake, and he masturbated into the papier-mâché Easter bunny, and they took away the male nurse in a not-so-straight jacket, who asked what it was, the pool of cum on the lunch table under the bunny, and Carl told him what it was, that third nurse who we ping-ponged scores winning when he was losing, losing when he was winning, convincing ourselves, Carl, Allen, and me, that the poor trash nurse was nuttier than we. Lily's dead, Oma's dead, Jane's dead, Anne's dead. We're alive, you, and you, alive, alive, oh. Not 6, yet 4 years young, Lily's mother dies, leaving me for lack of undiscovered medicalities. Her, my Oma grandmother, playing Chopin and Bach for me, hooked on sandbox and swing. These things on this disappeared. We sailed the SS Washington to USA, freedom, refugeedom, and an awful appendix bursting pain held by Uncle Norbert to the porthole, viewed Statue of Liberty, first English lessons in Morrisania Hospital out of Little Black Sambo, round and round with tigers turning into butter, not exactly what I'd had with good German Strobelpeter, uncut nails and hair, too much soup, and mind your manners, or we'll decapitate you, or worse. Adam's dead, Jared's dead, Otto's dead, and Irma's dead. You're alive to live, alive, 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 oh. God's dead, gods are dead. The name Hashem's alive as in do unto others is enough, like Mehababas, you are God and I am God. The difference is I know I am alive, alive, oh, along the highway, freeway, safe way, throughway, alive, alive, oh. Is that enough poetry? I don't know. There's always more. You can.
Can I do a little bit more history and then
Sure.
we'll go back to poetry? I just want you said something so for somebody who's interested in this era. So it's like a mystery, you know, that has to be answered. You talked about one of the interesting things about KPFA in its earliest days was Jaime D'Angelo reading all these Indian tales for children.
Well, they weren't known for children, but yes, okay.
It was sort of aimed at the time. There was cultural diversion for children. And if you connect, how did you connect with KPFA? KPFA itself was this amazing institution that could be really nowhere else in America at that time. And there it was in Berkeley. And how did you connect with it?
I connected with it before it was established. There was a couple who lived in Berkeley named the Moores, Richard and his wife, and they were friends of Lou Hill's.
Right.
And Lou was a poet. I met him, and we became very good friends. We liked each other's poems. And he lived in Duncan's Mills, which is up in the Russian River, and he had a little hand press there, and he invited me up, and we printed a poem of his and a poem of mine, and we set the type, you know, and we, my wife, my first wife at the time, and his wife, and the four of us became very friendly. And I went to a few meetings at the Moore's house with Lou and about the start of trying to, and you know, he was from a wealthy Oklahoma family, and he had been a conscientious objector, but because his family were Quakers, he had been posted as a kind of a guy to investigate how the conscientious objectors were doing in the camps that they had been assigned to. So he wasn't actually in the camps, he was working for the Quakers. But he had all these real ambitions. He wanted to be president of the United States. I was amazed that, you know, here was this guy, and he said the beginning of what he wanted to do was, he did that America was lacking a culture of communications, and he couldn't figure out what the first step would be, but at that time, FM was very new. Very few people even had radios that could receive anything but AM. And he decided that the first step would be to get a license for an FM station. And he contacted the president at the time of the Ford Foundation, a guy whose name I can't remember, although I met him. Somebody's going to remember his name. He was the president of the University of Chicago.
Robert Hutchins. Robert Hutchins.
Exactly.
Robert Maynard Hutchins.
Exactly. Hutchins. And he appealed to Hutchins. And Hutchins was at the time the Ford Foundation. And he gave us the money for the transmitter. And he gave us money to operate the station for the first year. Amazing, right? Boom, boom, boom. And we got an office on Shattuck Avenue, and I became I'm not saying this was yesterday and today, you know, it took time, but I became the public relations director of the station. Not that I knew anything about that. And I became a producer of poetry and other programs, including Jaime Angulo and Alan Watts and Grace Clements and so forth and so on. This is, you know, it was very hard to get a station going, but we got it going. And there were a lot of people on. And the unfortunate thing, in a sense, was that Lou Hill was a terrific womanizer. At one point, he had not only his wife, but either 3 or 4 mistresses, and they were all working at the station. It was like quite unbelievable, you know. And finally, he committed suicide. I mean, it was one of the most disturbing events in my life at the time, when he wound putting carbon monoxide tube out of his car and committed suicide in Duncan's Mills. You know, I mean, this is years and years later, but it's part of that story. Yeah, so.
But you wonder about that, just think about like Anthony Bourdain, you look at somebody and you think like,
Get everything.
why?
Why?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What?
There are a lot of whys in life, you know, and some of them are answerable.
Some.
Some of them are answerable.
One of the other things that the internet said about you, which I found fascinating, was that you were Maya Angelou's manager.
Ah, here we go.
Yeah, well, yeah.
What's your famous line, Papa?
The line that Maya used when introducing me was, and I'll get back to the history, but when the line she used was, if it was a man, she would say, "This is Gerd Stern, my manager and my man." But if it was a woman, she would say, "This is Gerd Stern, my man and my manager." You know, and she meant it. I'll tell you the co-effect of the story. We were very friendly with Lena Horn because Lena and Maya appreciated each other's work. And when she heard that Maya said that, she said, "My God, I'm going to use that line." Because her husband, Lenny, was her piano accompanist, and he was her manager. So, you know, but I met Maya through a very good friend of mine named Jack Simpson, who's no longer alive, and Buckwheat, who is also no longer alive. That we lived on the barge together, and Maya had been married to a Greek guy who I knew, and who was a pot dealer named Tosh Angelos. And Maya's name was not Angelou, it was really Jones. But she took the name and she changed the name from Angelos to Angelou, but that she was no longer with Tosh for long. And she had been the premier dancer, and she also sang in the Porgy and Bess company that toured Europe. And she had just come back when I met her, and she was looking for a place to live. She had a son who was quite young, 9 or 10, named Clyde, and I offered her to come live on the barge and with Clyde, and she came, and that started it. And I got her a job working at the Purple Onion because Barry Drew, who was part of the Barrymore family, lived on a boat just a few boats away from mine. He was later murdered by a sailor on leave. Yeah, sad story. But he was a great. The Purple Onion, you know, was the big deal across the street from the Hungry Eye. We also knew the people at the Hungry Eye very well. But Phyllis Diller Gottlieb, who was one of the limelighers. So that was a lot of fun to manage that kind of talent. And I got Maya's jobs in New York and Chicago, and she would go there, and I actually have 12 letters from her, one which she calls me Pretty Papa. If you can believe that. 90, right? Well, anyway, so that was Maya, okay?
Okay,
And
okay.
you ask good questions, but I give lousy answers.
No, I'm enjoying it.
They're lousy because all these people have to listen to them.
Hey, I don't think
We're not suffering.
Good.
nobody's suffering here.
It's good.
Just because I've just been reading a wonderful book for all of you who haven't seen it called Varda,
Jean
which,
Varda. Oh, yeah.
which is for sale downstairs.
Really?
Great book.
Jean Varda, the painter, who had his own barge.
No.
Vallejo.
He
His
had a
was an
ferry
old
boat.
ferry boat, yeah, the Vallejo. You had a barge next door.
Yeah, because this is a very complex story, because Gordon Onslow Ford was a painter who lived in Mill Valley with his wife, who was a San Francisco heiress named Jacqueline, and it was her money. He was a baronet from England, but he didn't have a penny too. So he owned a piece of the waterfront somehow in Sausalito. And I went to a party at their house with Philip Lamantia in Mill Valley, and he introduced me to Harry Parch. And he said, this is a friend of mine that I met recently, and I'm helping him to get his compositions and his instruments together, and I found a place for him, and I'd like to introduce you, and maybe you would help him. And Harry started talking to me about his concepts of 43 tonal music instead of, tempered scale music, and how he built instruments, and he had some in Sausalito. Would I come and take a look at them? And he and I became immediately very close, and I went down, and he needed all kinds of help, and I became totally involved with him. It was more or less at the same time that I was with Maya.
Yeah, it's something. My father was the conductor of the Gate 5 Ensemble.
That's right,
And
you're right.
yeah, Gordon Onslow Ford was an English surrealist.
Yes.
He's the only surrealist that actually lived here for very long. Of the
Well, I mean,
Paris group. But
Varda considered himself.
oh no, absolutely. And I interviewed Gordon quite a bit at the end, and he's a very interesting person. Now I'm going to shamelessly plug. I have a book called From West to East. I'll send you a copy of it. It has a lot of that in it, and I have a new book coming out on the same topic except San Francisco. So anyway.
That's fantastic, because
Thank you.
what Gordon said to me when he asked me to lunch on the Vallejo, he said, look, I really appreciate what you've done for Harry. I got the ensemble, I got most of them from the Army, the U.S. Army, from the fort, which is near the Golden
The
Gate
Cloud
Bridge.
Chamber Bowls.
Of course.
Yeah.
But they were mostly jazz musicians who had been drafted because of the war at the time, and so they loved Harry's instruments, and they loved playing them, and they were our ensemble. They were all for off-duty Army.
Yeah.
And where was I? So Gordon says, I want to give you something to appreciate the fact that you've done for Harry. So I was pretty poor. I figured he was going to give me some money, right? No. He said, what I'm giving you is a berth on this land next to the Vallejo for a barge or a boat, whatever. I said, gee, thanks a lot. I was living in the valley in Throckmorton in a kind of a lousy apartment with some other people. And a couple of weeks later, I was having a beer in the Tin Angel. The Tin Angel was a bar in Sausalito owned by a woman who was a graduate from Black Mountain College, Peggy Toke Watkins, right? And Peggy was sitting at the bar talking to her lesbian girlfriend, Blanche. And she was saying, Blanche, if you don't sell that fucking barge and get rid of it somehow, we're split. Because I no longer want to live with you with your complaining about that dumb ship and having to pay rent in the shipyard every month, and we don't have enough to eat. And Bart says, what do you mean not enough to eat? You have the bar's keeping us alive. But anyway, they're arguing, and I'm saying I say, Peggy, what is this about a barge or a ship? And I said, what do you care? I said, I happen to care because of something that happened recently, which I don't want to tell you about yet until I find out what this is. And she says, you know Bart, she's Blanche, she's a sculptor. She somehow wound up owning this old Navy laundry barge, which is in Don Arquez's shipyard in the center of Sausalito, and she pays money every month for rental, and she's got to get rid of it because it's eating up everything. So I said, I know Don, because Donald Arquez was the son of the guy who had originally it was the biggest shipyard in Sausalito. So I went to see Don. I said, hey, what's this about Blanche's thing? He said, oh, it's a pain in the ass, man. It's an old barge. It's got a house on it. She doesn't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with it. I said, tell me, will you show it to me? So he showed it to me. My God, it's like this room, you know, it's 135 feet long and 30 foot wide, and it has a deck on the back, and it has a huge room and other rooms. I say, Don, you know Gordon Onslow Ford? He said, of course I know Gordon, he has the Vallejo. I said, he gave me a berth next to the Vallejo. Can we get this barge up to there? He said, it's going to take a lot of work to get that barge up there. He said, if you think you can get a lot of help, he said, to get that barge to float instead of being on the mud will take at least a month for the next high tide. And it may not be possible. You're going to have to get mattresses and 2x4s and all kinds of stuff because there are leaks. And you've got to stop all the leaks because otherwise my pumps won't raise it. So this is a long story, you know. I go to the no-name bar and I say to a few of my friends there's a magazine out of the no-name bar, a literary magazine, Calvin Kenfield and a lot of great writers, Evan. So what's happening? I get a crew of 5 or 6 people who are willing to help me. And then there are other people who are saying it can't be done. You know, we spend a month with like maybe 50 mattresses and endless stuff. And the high tide comes and I'm below and he puts his pumps on, nothing happens. So I give up. And Don says, "What's the matter with you? I told you it was going to be hard. You've got to take another month and it'll work." And he's right. We spend another month and we do a lot of work. And at the end of that month, I'm down below and trying to spend the last week. And there's this thunder crack. I mean, it's like all the noise in the world is happening, and I'm below, and the barge floats on the water. And Donald's pumps are working, and we bring the barge up to the Gord Noslo Forest land, and we put it right next to the Vallejo. And the next day, we go back to the mud where it was because we couldn't figure out what the crack was, because it sounds like thunder. On the mud are lying the whole bottom planks of the barge and thousands of nails sticking out. And the barge had 3 sets of planks under it. The third set was huge beams, but the second set held and it floated. And I lived on that barge forever, and so did other people.
I'm a historian. Can you even guess the year that was?
Oh yeah, and I guess the year that was.
1949.
69.
Yeah,
What,
I
the Gord
think that's
Noslo
a-
Ford thing? 1949.
40. No.
I was born in 54, Papa.
50?
Adam was born. yeah.
What?
Adam was born 2 years before that, so
I'm thinking when Oslo
You
Ford
were,
on the
you were
Vallejo.
born when?
54.
Yeah, it was in the 50s. It wasn't
Okay.
40s.
Yeah.
It was definitely in the 50s.
Yeah.
And I can't, and it lasted, you know, through the 60s. But, yeah, okay.
Want to read more poetry?
I don't know. Do you want more poetry? I don't know. Let's see. Oh. I wrote a lot of poems from the very beginning about mirrors. In my first book, which I meant to bring with me, but I didn't really find it, there was the first poem was, "I fist the mirror," and then it's something about cracking lines, the he's to me's and him's to hers. But this is a much more recent poem called Imago. Who am I if not myself, disappearing before yourself as meaningless reflection of context conditioned by our dependence on that mirroring. And mortality, in the book it says mortality, that's not the right title, it's mortality, morality. I've had this book for months and I never discovered it. Always seems to be just one more thing to fill up, take out, ingest, excrete, compare, adjust, relate, enjoy, exaggerate, pay, fulfill, diminish. Always just one thing more from start to finish. Yeah, you know. Hey, I like to write poetry.
I like to hear you read it.
Okay, I spent a lot of time in the last 30 years on the island of Jamaica. And this is a poem which is much longer than what I'm going to read, but it's called Carabella, which is the name of a resort and the grill in Jamaica. Definitely like honey, moon, saga, raga, we tick, take, suck, poke, love, to lose a little memory, took, take, the holy must throws away, asks for more, one draw, whatever wave by form, mold, that is to cast sea surfaces, slight motion, made constant cry of sonnenschein, fragments of light net or light scales, fish. Could it have been Hashem had a thing about shells? That must have been a later comer. Tuck, tick, blue sky says clouds, white wisps say sky, black clouds give rain, quicker, louder than toke, take, pepper rock, some seed, however. Later is at least next, and at most never. When they say later, they mean next year. Dick, toke, take the digital twofer, convert analog, noisy, diverting, jiggling, fuzzing the neon beam, rippling split off sign, light net, sand scan, grain on grain is on or off, black or white man, sun figure on shadow ground, Hashem's geometry, tick time, toke time, real time in paradigm.
Nice, very nice.
And love is not enough to protect us against each other's excess, not enough to still agony or fear, to keep us from words bloody as wounds. Love is only enough to hold each other as if forever were now.
Great.
Bravo. I don't want to hog this. I bet there are questions out there.
How did the mattresses figure into fixing the boat?
Oh, okay. Well, you know, if you think of the underneath of a barge with huge beams on all sides and caulking in between the beams usually is what's needed, but leaks develop. So what you do is you find that leak and you try and stuff it with caulking and whatever you can stuff it with material, and over the leak you put a mattress
With 2x4s.
with 2x4s nailed into the above and the below beams. And that's how you keep it from leaking, and you got lots of those. I mean, a month full, and then the next month full. And the next month there were only a few compared to what there were originally. But they develop as you keep going, and hey, and the barge stayed
Stayed
floating, stayed floating for a while, and then we had to move it again
How long?
to put it further north and put it on the mud again, eventually. And that's where it wound up, and it's gone. I don't know what happened to it. I rented it to somebody, and Sausalito became very upset with the sewage problems. I mean, the waterfront people just put sewage into the water,
Yeah.
you know.
Still going on,
It's
there's still
just-
fighting
no,
about
there's an
that.
article.
All over again,
Years ago.
Yeah.
It's amazing, yeah.
Although they're mostly, at least to start with, they're mostly throwing away the derelicts and those that aren't abandoned. But,
Yeah,
you know they're gonna put the hammer down on everybody sooner or later.
yeah. Well, they tried and they failed many times. We had a fairly huge colony of people on the waterfront. Very interesting, some characters that wound up there. I mean, Varda and Alan Watts and Gordon were very civilized people compared to some of the others. Because Varda was fairly important artist, and Gordon supported Varda very well because the Vallejo belonged to Gordon, and Alan Watts, you know, came in kind of out of the blue from England. He had been caught, you know, he was a Church of England,
Priest?
well, something deacon or something, I can't remember what, but he had run off with his superior's wife. And boarded to the U.S.
Those deacons.
And you know, and then became, you know, an authority on Zen and Buddhism, which he had not really been in England. He had an amazing transition, and I was at KPFA at the time, and he had such a wonderful delivery that I introduced him. Other people took credit for it, namely somebody named Sandy Jacobs, who's no longer with us. But yeah, and he lived on the Vallejo for quite a long time, and he also lived at Druid Heights, where Michael Tavoynin is here, right? Michael is right there. Michael has put together the committee to save or to preserve Druid Heights, which is where my original 7-foot sound and light creation, Contact is the Only Love, was built. Roger was he was not a licensed architect, he was not a licensed anything, but he was a genius at building houses and of doing interesting, very Japanese style interiors. And I worked with him on several houses before, as a carpenter, before he was very generous. He offered his shop and his own help and his tools to build the 7-foot construction that we made there of plywood and motors and speakers and lights, and it's now in 2002. It went to Europe and it wasn't insured and it got shipped back and kind of destroyed. So we built 6 20-inch miniature versions of it. And they're very much like the original, except very different technology. That instead of plywood 7 feet, the 20 inches are steel, and it's done with computer-aided technology that they bent the steel. And, hey, but they're beautiful little pieces, and we've shown them all over the U.S. and also in Europe museums. Honey, what's the show at the Whitney? And Summer of Love. We had a Summer of Love in England and in Vienna. And hey, we've been very lucky. The commune and USCO was very well publicized in the 1960s and has continued to show the work of that time through the present. We have a show opening in Freiburg, Switzerland, with a good half a dozen major pieces in February. We're doing a conversation and multimedia performance at the National Gallery of Arts in Washington, D.C. in March. You know, hey, the past resurfaces.
It doesn't really go away.
When I taught at Harvard for a while, which was another odd problem, and one of the things I learned there was there's a strategy about taking advantage of opportunities. You know, and I like the phrase "opportunity knocks," and when it knocks, you better answer, because if you don't, it's gone. You know, and I'm a good answerer.
God knows you've crossed, you've gone through enough doors, all of various
Doors, yes. Sometimes they're just spaces. Yeah, sometimes doors are closed. I don't know, but you're right. I've managed to inhabit various places, and there's about 10 people here who are involved in different places and times in that life, and so I'm 90, so what? You know, so buttons.
And Druid Heights just got landmark status, didn't it? I was reading.
So
I read something the last couple of days about that. Yeah?
well, basically, earlier, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. So the National Park Service seemingly is moving towards making it, a registered National Historic Landmark. Put it in the national.
Where is it?
So Druid Heights is near Muir Woods. It's probably about a 20-minute walk from through the territory near there, and so there's a lot of buildings there, and I can give you, if you come up to me afterwards, I can give you my card, and then it's got the various addresses on there that you can start to check out. But
So that's going to potentially give you access to money to read?
well, so it belongs to the National Park Service.
Oh,
I mean, it belongs to the National Park Service. They, when the Gold Gate National Recreation Area was being established in the 1970s, so Muir Woods had long been a park there, that many people went to. It was very popular, national. It was the first, I believe, one of the first anyway, national monuments. And so the Golden Gate National Recreation Area they're trying to buy up other lands in the headlands. They're getting land from the U.S. Army in the Presidio. And so adjacent to Muir Woods is a 50-acre subdivision. And so they did not want that subdivision to be built out. There are a few kind of summer cabins, partly inhabited, partly not in there. And then there's this 5 acres that by this time has become known as Druid Heights. And it was named by one of the co-founders, was a woman named Elsa Gidlow. Elsa Gidlow was born in 1898 in Hull, England. Grew up in Montreal area, Quebec, and ended up in New York in the 20s, and in 1923 became the first openly lesbian poet in the United States when she published On a Gray Thread in 1923. She came to San Francisco in 26 and soon fell in with people like Kenneth Rexroth, Ansel Adams, was part of a very broad circle of artists here. And she, through KPFA, met Roger Summers, as Gerd has said, a very talented builder who was living in Marin County, and they both, Elsa, and with he and his wife, and then Elsa, in their own, they didn't really know each other. They met through Alan Watts's a Zen Buddhism class in the city. They met again at a KPFA picnic, and they were all looking for a more remote place to live. And Roger and his wife knew of this land, and Elsa didn't really have the money, but she came up with a way to make the initial payment for it, and the place got started in 1954.
So what Michael's confronting is, you can all imagine how much money the current political administration is giving to the National Park Service. I mean, preservation is expensive. So to preserve, I mean, one of the buildings on this land is this fascinating room where Alan Watts wrote The Way of Zen, a very famous book in the history of Zen in America.
Well, I'm not sure he totally, that's a little up in the air, how much writing he did there of The Way of Zen. I mean, I have yet to have that fully confirmed.
Okay, well, you're the expert on that. But
Yeah,
anyway,
he did write a lot of stuff there.
But it was his library.
Yeah.
Well, his library was built there in 70.
Right.
In 71. And he moved there. He left the Vallejo in about 69 and moved out there to a house that had been built for Elsa Gidlow's sister, and a very fanciful house that continued to be added on over the years. If you know the Marin County Civic Center, so Roger was very much an aficionado of Frank Lloyd Wright. And he built one house. One of his early houses was like a chambered nautilus shell, spiraled up. And late in the game, Frank Lloyd Wright was building, like he built a mushroom-shaped house in New York. And so he was heading that way. And Roger had loved Wright so much that he got a job at a hotel where Frank was staying a lot and managed to do his room service and then insinuate himself. His story goes, he and Frank spent several hours conversing. They were both great talkers, and the young Roger hit it off. So anyway, Roger was he built many fanciful structures there. He took other structures, old structures, and turned them into really amazing buildings. And on one of them, he had this real, nice young carpenter's helper was this guy, Gary Snyder, who he'd met on Varda's boat in Sausalito. And one question, when Gerd and I met earlier this year, and, especially I think relevant to this group, is that Gerd probably saw Gary and many others again. You were at the going away party for Gary in Mill Valley in '56 that's totally documented by Jack and the Dharma Bums. Maybe not totally, but it's certainly more than most parties.
The party well when he went off to Japan.
And the house that the party was in is still there, but Gary's cabin up the hill is no longer there. And you were also at Gallery 6 too, weren't you? You were there with Philip Lamantia. Yeah. Yeah.
Get around.
You got around?
But
And I still do.
well,
Which is why I'm here.
and you got around when we went back to Druid Heights this spring on May, and I do have a laptop here with the footage of that, which we may show a little bit of a little bit
I
later.
mean, it's amazing because the room which Roger put together in a kind of a really Japanese style is still there, and it's totally authentic. You know, it's amazing. And we have a photograph of myself and Barbara Summers, Roger's wife, sitting in that room at that time. And if you compare it to the room as it still exists, boom.
Yeah.
You know.
Anyway, for those of you, you might want to talk to Michael, because the point is that the Park Service has very little money for something like this, and very little inclination given the politics, and it'll be up to people around here to pressure them into making sure that it is properly preserved. Meantime, let's talk about a preserved poet and his birthday. Jerry would like to.
Gerd said he gets around.